The radio crackled with static across the USS Theodore Roosevelt's Combat Information Center at 3:47 hours, somewhere in the contested waters off the Horn of Africa. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Titan Rodriguez pressed his headset closer, straining to decode the fragmented transmission bleeding through the electromagnetic interference. What he heard made his blood freeze. Bravo team, taking heavy fire, coordinates 279er, requesting immediate medevac. The voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Jake Morrison, leader of SEAL Team 5's most decorated squad. They'd inserted 12 hours ago on what intelligence had classified as a routine reconnaissance mission. Nothing about this sounded routine. Captain Sarah Blackwood leaned over the tactical display, her weathered fingers tracing the digital coastline where 8 of America's finest warriors had vanished into a communications blackout. The mission parameters had seemed straightforward. Infiltrate a suspected weapons cache, gather intelligence, extract before dawn. But something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Sir, we're showing multiple hostile signatures converging on Bravo Team's last known position," reported the radar operator, his voice tight with urgency. "Estimate 40 to 60 combatants, armed vehicles, possibly RPGs." The carrier's air wing commander, Colonel Michael Harrison, studied the overhead imagery with growing alarm. The SEALs had been compromised, surrounded in a kill zone 30 miles inland with no viable extraction route. Every conventional rescue option would take too long. By the time helicopters could penetrate that far into hostile territory, there might be nothing left to rescue. "What assets do we have airborne?" Blackwood demanded. 2 F-18 Super Hornets on combat air patrol, call signs Viper 1 and Viper 2. Standard loadout, but they're configured for air-to-air intercept, not close air support. Harrison shook his head grimly. "Even if we could retask them, those coordinates put Bravo Team in a narrow valley surrounded by ridgelines. Any attack runs would be suicide missions. The terrain's too tight, too many surface-to-air threats." The command center fell silent except for the persistent hum of electronics and the distant rumble of the carrier's nuclear reactors. 8 Navy SEALs were dying in some god-forsaken African valley, and the most powerful naval force on Earth seemed helpless to save them. That's when Lieutenant Kaya Ghost, Nakamura's voice, cut through the tactical frequency with uncharacteristic urgency. She'd been monitoring from the ready room, suited up in her flight gear despite being officially grounded for the past 3 weeks following an incident that had earned her a formal reprimand. "Control, this is Ghost. I'm requesting immediate clearance for launch." The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in the CIC knew Ghost's reputation, her uncanny ability to thread impossible needles in aircraft that shouldn't survive what she put them through. They also knew why she was currently persona non grata. "Negative, Ghost. You're not authorized for flight operations." "Sir, with respect, those are our people down there." Kaya Nakamura had never been one to follow conventional wisdom. Born to a Japanese-American father who'd flown Mustangs in World War II and a Lakota mother who'd served 3 tours as an Army medic, she'd inherited a unique blend of precision and intuition that made her simultaneously the Navy's most gifted pilot and its most persistent headache. Her F-18E Super Hornet sat ready on Catapult 2, fueled and armed with a standard air-to-air loadout that would be useless for close air support. But Ghost wasn't thinking about conventional tactics. She was remembering the modifications she'd made to her aircraft's targeting systems during her last deployment, unauthorized alterations that had gotten her grounded in the first place. "Ghost, maintain position. We're working alternative extraction scenarios," came the terse response from the air boss. Through her helmet's display, Kaya watched the tactical situation deteriorate in real time. The SEAL's position was being overrun systematically, enemies closing from 3 directions while the Americans were pinned in a rocky outcropping with minimal cover. Every second of delay meant fewer of them would come home. She thought about Morrison, the gruff team leader who'd bought her coffee after her first combat mission when she'd been too wired to sleep. About Kowalski, the demolitions expert who'd shown her pictures of his newborn daughter. About Martinez, barely 22, who reminded her of her younger brother. Control, Ghost is rolling. Her hands moved across the controls with practiced efficiency, initiating startup sequences that would bring her Hornet to life. Ghost, I repeat, you are not authorized for launch. Stand down immediately. But Kaya was already taxiing toward the catapult, her aircraft's twin engines spooling up to full military power. The deck crew, recognizing the signs of an impending launch, scrambled to clear the area even as confused voices filled the radio frequencies. Ghost, this is Captain Blackwood. You will abort launch immediately or face court-martial. Ma'am, court-martial assumes I'm coming back. The statement hung in the air like a death sentence. Everyone understood what Ghost was implying. The mission she was contemplating was beyond dangerous. It was statistically impossible. Single aircraft, no support, against overwhelming ground forces in terrain that had already claimed helicopter crews foolish enough to attempt low-level flight. Colonel Harrison's voice cut through the chatter with cold authority. All stations, Ghost is going rogue. Do not, repeat, do not provide tactical support or guidance. But even as he spoke the words, Harrison found himself studying the terrain maps with new eyes. If anyone could pull off a miracle in that death trap, it would be the pilot they called Ghost. The catapult launch felt different this time, more final, more desperate. Kaya's Super Hornet screamed off the carrier deck into the pre-dawn darkness, climbing rapidly through layers of thin clouds toward a mission that every tactical manual would classify as suicide. Behind her, the Theodore Roosevelt shrank to a distant point of light on the Black Ocean. She banked hard toward the African coast, pushing her aircraft beyond recommended climb rates as she raced against time and probability. The radio remained ominously silent. She was truly alone now, cut off from all support, flying toward coordinates that might already mark a graveyard rather than a rescue site. Through her night vision systems, the Horn of Africa materialized like a moonscape of jagged ridges and deep valleys carved by millennia of erosion. Somewhere in that maze of rock and sand, 8 Navy SEALs were fighting for their lives against impossible odds. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a voice that sounded suspiciously like her father whispered the old aviator's prayer. Lord, don't let me screw this up. The terrain below grew increasingly hostile as Ghost penetrated deeper into enemy territory. Her radar warning receiver painted threat signatures across her display, surface-to-air missile sites, mobile anti-aircraft guns, and electronic warfare systems that could turn her sophisticated Hornet into an expensive tomb. Standard protocol demanded she climb to 30,000 feet, well above the effective range of most ground-based threats. Instead, she descended. At 500 feet above ground level, Kaya began threading her way between ridgelines using terrain-following radar and pure instinct. The landscape rushed past her canopy in a blur of browns and grays, punctuated by the occasional flash of muzzle flare from the firefight ahead. Her modified targeting systems, the ones that had gotten her grounded, were finally about to prove their worth. Bravo team, this is Ghost. I'm 2 minutes out from your position. Need you to mark your location with infrared strobes. The response came immediately, Morrison's voice tight with pain and disbelief. Ghost, what the hell are you doing here? Thought you were grounded. Long story, Chief. Right now I need sitrep and exact positions on hostiles. We're down to 6 effectives, 2 wounded. Enemies have us surrounded on 3 sides, approximately 50 meters out. They're using the ridgeline for cover, lots of automatic weapons, possible RPG teams. Kaya processed the information while simultaneously flying her aircraft through a canyon that left mere yards of clearance on either wingtip. Her targeting systems were painting dozens of heat signatures around the SEAL's position, a killing field that would require surgical precision to navigate without hitting friendly forces. Chief, I need you to trust me. When I make my run, keep everyone's heads down. This is going to get loud. What happened next would be studied in tactical aviation schools for decades to come, though the official after-action reports would classify most details above top secret. Ghost's first pass came from an impossible angle, diving through a gap in the ridgeline that shouldn't have existed for an aircraft her size. Her 20-millimeter cannon spoke with deadly precision, walking a line of destruction across enemy positions, while avoiding the SEALs by margins measured in feet, rather than the recommended safe distances. The second pass came from the opposite direction, Ghost pulling her Hornet through a knife-edge turn that pushed both pilot and aircraft to the very limits of human and mechanical endurance. More enemy positions disappeared in clouds of smoke and debris as her remaining ammunition found their marks with supernatural accuracy. But it was her third pass that entered the realm of aviation legend. With her cannon empty and no air-to-ground ordnance, Ghost did something that violated every principle of tactical aviation. She flew directly over the enemy positions at minimum altitude and maximum afterburner, creating a sonic disruption that shattered rock formations and triggered landslides along the entire ridgeline. The psychological effect on the surviving enemy forces was immediate and devastating. "Ghost, you magnificent crazy witch," Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. "Hostiles are breaking contact. Repeat, hostiles are retreating." But Kaya wasn't finished. Her fuel state was critically low, her ammunition expended, and her aircraft had sustained damage from flying through debris fields that would have destroyed lesser machines. Standard procedure demanded an immediate return to base. Instead, she established a combat air patrol over the SEAL team's position, buying them precious time until extraction helicopters could arrive. For the next 47 minutes, Ghost flew lazy circles above her friends, a lone guardian angel in the brightening African sky. Her presence alone was enough to keep enemy reinforcements at bay, the psychological impact of her earlier attacks still reverberating through their command structure. When the MH-60 Seahawks finally arrived to extract the SEALs, Kaya was running on fumes and willpower. Her landing back on the Theodore Roosevelt would be remembered as barely controlled chaos, her damaged aircraft catching the arresting cable with less than 10 minutes of fuel remaining. As she climbed down from her cockpit, Ghost was met not with the expected court-martial detail, but with 8 Navy SEALs standing at attention in a formal salute. Chief Morrison stepped forward, his arm in an improvised sling, and extended his hand. "Ma'am, I don't know what they're planning to do to you for this, but I want you to know you saved our lives today, all of us. We won't forget that." Captain Blackwood appeared moments later, her expression unreadable as she surveyed the damaged Super Hornet and the pilot who defied direct orders to save American lives. The court-martial paperwork was already being prepared, but something in the way the rescued SEALs looked at Ghost made her pause. "Lieutenant Nakamura, you're confined to quarters pending investigation." "Understood, ma'am." But as Kaya walked away, she heard Morrison's voice carry across the flight deck. "That woman's got the biggest pair of brass wings I've ever seen." The investigation took 3 weeks. During that time, the story of Ghost's unauthorized mission spread throughout the fleet like wildfire. Fighter pilots who'd previously dismissed her as reckless began studying her tactics. Ground forces started requesting her specifically for close air support missions. Even the Marines, traditionally skeptical of Navy aviation, began referring to her runs as Ghost protocols. The hearing itself was a masterpiece of military bureaucracy, complete with PowerPoint presentations analyzing every second of her flight profile and detailed assessments of regulation violations. But when Chief Morrison was called to testify, the entire tone shifted. "Ma'am," he said, addressing the Board of Inquiry, "I've served with the finest warriors this country has to offer. I've seen courage in places where courage shouldn't exist. But what Lieutenant Nakamura did that morning, that wasn't just courage. That was love for her fellow warriors expressed through perfect violence. The Navy found itself in an unprecedented position. They couldn't ignore the flagrant violation of orders, but they also couldn't ignore the 8 lives saved by those violations. The compromise was elegant in its complexity: formal reprimand, temporary loss of flight privileges, and mandatory psychological evaluation. 3 months later, Lieutenant Kaya Ghost Nakamura returned to flight status with a new assignment: developing unconventional close air support tactics for Special Operations Forces. Her first class of students included some of the Navy's most experienced pilots, men and women who'd initially scoffed at learning from someone they'd considered a loose cannon. But as they watched her demonstrate techniques that seemed to defy the laws of physics and probability, their skepticism transformed into something approaching reverence. Ghost wasn't just teaching them how to fly differently. She was showing them how to think differently about the relationship between aircraft, terrain, and the warriors they were sworn to protect. The legend grew with each mission. SEALs began requesting her by name. Marines started timing their operations around her availability. Even Army Rangers, notoriously independent, began coordinating with Navy Aviation specifically to access Ghost's unique capabilities. Her call sign took on new meaning throughout the Special Operations community. She wasn't called Ghost because she was hard to see. She was Ghost because she appeared when you needed her most, struck with supernatural precision, and vanished before the enemy could respond. But legends, like aircraft, require careful maintenance to remain airworthy. And 3 years after her unauthorized rescue mission, Lieutenant Commander Kaya Nakamura received orders that would test everything she'd learned about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. The mission briefing was classified beyond even her considerable clearance level. All she knew was the location: a remote valley in Afghanistan, where a joint special operations task force had been compromised during a high-value target raid. The enemy response had been swift and overwhelming, trapping 36 American and Allied special operators in a killing field that made her previous rescue look like a training exercise. This time, there would be no unauthorized launch, no desperate improvisation. This was a fully sanctioned mission with complete tactical support, advanced ordnance, and the blessing of every level of command up to the Pentagon itself. Ghost had been specifically requested by the task force commander, a Marine colonel who'd heard the stories and decided he wanted the best when his people needed saving. Standing beside her Super Hornet in the pre-mission twilight, Kaya found herself thinking about the path that had led her to this moment. The unauthorized rescue that had nearly ended her career had instead transformed her into something the military hadn't quite known it needed: a bridge between conventional aviation and the specialized world of special operations. Her aircraft looked different now, modified with systems that existed in a gray area between experimental and operational, targeting pods that could paint laser designators with surgical precision, communication suites that allowed direct coordination with ground forces, and weapons loadouts specifically configured for the kind of close-quarters combat that made conventional pilots nervous. Ghost, this is Overlord. You are cleared for launch. Godspeed. The launch felt routine now. Another catapult shot into another dangerous sky above another foreign battlefield. But as Kaya climbed toward her cruising altitude, she carried with her the accumulated weight of every mission, every rescue, every warrior who'd come home because she'd been willing to push beyond the boundaries of what was considered possible. The radio chatter was different this time, more professional, more coordinated. This wasn't a rogue operation. This was the full might of American military aviation focused on a single objective. But at its center was still one pilot in one aircraft, flying toward coordinates where good people needed help. As the mountains of Afghanistan materialized through her heads-up display, Ghost began her descent toward what would become the defining mission of her career. Behind her, the sun was setting over a world where legends were born not in the telling, but in the living. In the valley below, 36 special operators heard the distinctive sound of jet engines cutting through the mountain air and felt something they hadn't experienced in hours: hope, because they knew that sound meant Ghost had come for them. And Ghost never left anyone behind.